All right, it's a new year, which means there's going to be a bunch of new ships coming to Star Trek Online this year. So I thought I'd take the opportunity to go over a number of ships that I'm hoping that we see come to Star Trek Online at some point eventually. Hopefully this year, but at least hopefully in the next few years, maybe, hopefully. Please. Star Trek Online has added a number of ships that were previously exclusive to older Star Trek video games, like the Premonition or the Okinawa, and I would love to see them continue to do this because there are still plenty of other ships that were original to older Star Trek games that could definitely use the love. One I would really love to see added to Star Trek Online is this ship, the Yorktown class, which is an NX era ship that was original to the video game Star Trek Legacy. This was meant to be like a larger, beefier battleship or dreadnought type ship that would have been in operation during the Earth-Romulan War. I really like the ship. It very much has that NX styling, but possesses a bit more familiarity with what we would eventually see later on in the 23rd century with the Constitution class, with the introduction of a longer secondary hull and more outstretched warp nacelles. And they even put a cover plating over the warp grills on the nacelles on the outer edges of them to make them a bit more reminiscent of the original series style warp nacelles. I really like this ship. I think it's really cool looking, and I would love to see this thing added to Star Trek Online. Maybe it's like an NX era version of like a battle cruiser, or maybe even a dreadnought. I feel like dreadnought is kind of pushing it, but it would be a good excuse to introduce like shuttle pod combat pets, which I think would be really funny. The only issue here really is that they would have to rename it because Yorktown is already a name that's widely used in Star Trek Online for the Yorktown subclass of the Odyssey class, which is the Enterprise F. So yeah, it's kind of taken in stow, but there are a number of different names that they could use for this because with Star Trek Legacy, the way it worked is you always had up to 4 different playable versions of that ship, and each of them had their own unique names. So they could choose from any of those, all of which are on memory beta, so you can find those pretty easily. Star Trek Legacy also had other NX era ships that were original to that game. Here we have the Poseidon class, which you can see is a little reminiscent to the Miranda class with the smaller roll bar with what looks like torpedo pods here and more lower slung warp nacelles. Again, this is another one I think that would be really cool for Star Trek Online. It'd be nice to have some more NX era representation in Star Trek Online. We've been going so heavy on the TMP era, which admittedly had been very neglected in Star Trek Online for a long time, but we've been getting so much of that for a bit. It'd be nice to kind of share the love to another very neglected era of Star Trek, and Enterprise very much falls into that category. Maybe we're getting a sign of that changing with the release of the recent Orion Interceptor, which was a ship that was from Star Trek Enterprise. So maybe we can be kind of hopeful for some of these ships. But yeah, it's a NX era style Miranda. I think this ship would be really cool, especially if they could get that to kit bash with the original Miranda skeleton. That would be really fun to see. But yeah, Poseidon class, I feel like there would be plenty of people who would be really interested in this ship. And I swear this will be the last Star Trek Enterprise era ship that I talk about. This is the Minuteman class, also from Star Trek Legacy. Much different hull configuration. This has a more spherical style hull mixed in with a roll bar, so it's a very interesting configuration. I feel like this would be like a really good option as like an NX era science vessel, just because of the spherical hull kind of gives a bit of a reminiscence to like the Daedalus and the Olympic class ships. So I feel like this would be kind of interesting too. So you can throw all 3 of these Enterprise era ships together as like a 3-pack and do like one of those mid to end of year bundles, like the Heritage Starship bundle for like an Enterprise era. Or, take those 3 and then throw in the NV Intrepid that was actually from the shows. And then boom, you got a solid 4-pack for an anniversary bundle. Just throwing that out there. I feel like any of these ships would be really interesting, especially because with Star Trek Online's line of thinking of they always want to include like a contemporary skin onto these ships too. So imagine like what some of these ships would look like in like a 2409 style skin too. I feel like there's a lot of potential there for the art department to play around with. So I that's something I would love to see. Now, I know I said we've had a ton of TMP era ships lately, and I've said that would be nice to move on. I wanted to make it clear, I'm certainly not sick of the TMP era ships either. I do love the TMP era, and frankly, with all the TMP ships that we've been getting lately, it does really surprise me that we haven't gotten this ship yet, the Akula class. This is another ship that was original to the Star Trek Starfleet Command games. And yeah, this was a pretty common sight in that game too. So it surprised me that we didn't get this ship at some point over the past couple releases of all the recent TMP era ships, just because this was I wouldn't say this is like a huge fan favorite, but this wasn't an unpopular ship. There were people who were pretty into this. And the other thing too is that there is a ship that is pretty similar to this already in Star Trek Online. Stowe released the Atlantis class not that long ago that was also on the same skeleton as the Challenger class, and I'm genuinely curious if this could work on that skeleton too, because it's a very similar configuration. Obviously, I don't know the scaling between the 2 ships, so it might not work together, but if they can make that mesh together, that's more space Barbie for those ships, which is always great. So Yeah, this would be a fun ship to have. Yeah, you're probably catching on by now. Yeah, most of these ships are going to be ships featured from previous Star Trek video games, but don't worry, they're not all from previous video games. But yeah, we're not there yet. We're still going through the video game ships. This is the USS Incursion that was originally featured in Star Trek Away Team and also had a little bit of an appearance in Star Trek Armada 2. In lore, this ship is actually a refitted version of the Defiant, though with its shape, I don't know if Star Trek Online could get this to mesh onto the Defiant skeleton. If they could, that would be awesome, because more space Barbie for the Defiant. But if they can't, I feel like this would be just fine as a ship on its own, because the neat thing about this ship is that it has a hollow cloak, meaning that it can disguise itself as other ships. And if you remember last year, Star Trek Online recently did the Star Trek Insurrection hollow ship that had a mechanic that would very much suit this ship. The hollow matrix mechanic, or whatever they called it, that allows the ship to disguise itself as other ships. Thematically, that fits in perfectly for the Incursion, so it feels like a no-brainer now that they have the mechanic down to introduce this ship as well, in order to, just to get more usage of this new experimental mechanic that they've been working on. Because, how often are they going to be able to use that on ships? So we may as well get another ship to be able to use that mechanic on, and Incursion is the perfect fit for it. Now, this very blurry image is called the Lexington class. Here, I found a fan-made version of the ship that gives a much clearer, much more high-res image. So yeah, this is the Lexington class. While this is a fan-made recreation of the ship was originally featured in Star Trek Klingon Academy. I really like this ship. I've talked about it in the past. It's basically a Excelsior-style ship in the layout of a Constitution class. So I feel like that kind of blend of the aesthetics is it really appeals to me. I really like it. So I know this isn't a wildly popular ship among the player base, having only ever been featured in Klingon Academy to my knowledge. So yeah, not this one doesn't get around all that much, but I think it's a neat design, and I would love to see this in Star Trek Online. And again, if they can get this to work on the Constitution class skeleton, I'm all the more for it, because I'm always in favor of more space Barbie for specific ship classes, and the Constitution especially. It's the Constitution. I'm always going to be happy for another Constitution variant. I know some of you are sick of the Constitution, and I say, how dare you? This very low-res image is actually the Cardassian Hutet class. I had to find a fan-made image that gives you a better idea of what the ship looks like. But yeah, the Hutet class, this is a massive Cardassian ship that was introduced in Star Trek Dominion Wars. That's the same game the Achilles class was introduced in, and yeah, I love this thing. It's massive, it's ridiculous, it's cool. This is one of the few ships that makes the Cardassians look really cool. So I think the big issue with this ship is because it's an alien ship, there is concern that it might not sell well, because we all know how it is at this point. I know there's a very vocal minority of you who insist that alien ships are better than all the Fed ships, but tell that to Star Trek Online sales reports. So yeah, there's the issue of this might not selling well, which is why I think that even though this is a ship that was introduced in an older Star Trek game, I don't think this should be added into the C store. In order for it to actually make money, it should be introduced in the lock boxes or the promo boxes, which I know sucks, but at least that way it would be in the game. Here's an image of the Hutet from the actual opening cutscene from Dominion Wars, so you can get an idea of just how massive this thing is. This thing is insane. It would be a really great candidate as like a Cardassian dreadnought carrier. And specifically, I say dreadnought carrier because, one, it's massive, like a dreadnought. It has a huge amount of firepower. These two red glowing bits, you kind of see these utilized as big, what Star Trek Online would call a lance weapon. So it could be equipped with a lance weapon as well as a hangar bay that can use frigates. Because in the cutscene, you also see it launch these two Norn-class frigates from the underside of the ship, which is why I think dreadnought carrier, or maybe just a regular dreadnought that can launch frigates, I think that would be a really good option for this ship. This is another favorite of mine, the Romulan Draconarius class. I don't think I'm pronouncing that right, but yeah, it's shaped like a bird. I've seen this thing be labeled as other things too, like the Winged Defender. So I think this thing actually has origins in FASA, which means at that point, Star Trek Online might not be able to use it because I know they don't have the rights for those. But if they can use this thing, I would love to see it added into Star Trek Online, just because it's absolutely silly looking. It takes the whole Romulan bird motif and just turns it up to 11 to be a ship that is literally shaped like a bird. I think it's hilarious, and I really want this thing in Star Trek Online because it's so funny to me. Okay, I promise this is the last ship with video game origins. This is the USS Aegis. This is actually a Kelvin timeline ship that was introduced in the game Star Trek Bridge Crew. It's very similar to the Kelvin-style Enterprise, but with noticeable differences. The neck is shorter, the nacelles are lower, and if you look closely, the actual geometry of the ship is a bit different. Like the end of the saucer thins out gradually rather than just kind of being a blunt curve. at the end of the saucer. The star drive and the nacelles have a little bit of a different shape to them. They're less smooth, a little more rough around the edges, really feeding into the prototype aspect of the ship, which is one of the reasons why I think this is a really interesting ship. It's not a straight up kit bash of the Kelvin style Constitution class. It's just there's a lot of subtle differences beyond the more straight up obvious differences as well. So it's not a straight up kit bash, which is what I really like about the ship. Yeah, it'd be really cool to see the Kelvin timeline get some love, and I feel like the Aegis here is a really great way to do that. Though the Aegis isn't the only way to give the Kelvin timelines some love. This is the USS Salcombe, which is actually a canon ship. You can see the ship way in the background in during the final scenes of Star Trek Beyond, during the scene where the Enterprise A is under construction. You can see it right back there. That's this ship, the USS Salcombe. And it's an interesting ship. I feel like this would be like a nice little, either like a pilot ship or some sort of like scout ship or a frigate, some small nimble ship, because you can definitely get the vibe that this is meant to be a small ship. So this would be like a small nimble little escort probably, and I feel like that would be fun because a lot of the Kelvin ships in the game right now, they're big, bulky, huge ships, and it'd just be interesting to go for a different vibe for the Kelvin timeline by introducing this much smaller ship. And frankly, it looks really cool. Like I love the cutout in the front of the saucer. It gives it a very similar but much different look than you typically see on a Starfleet ship. The pointed end on the star drive, it almost looks a little reminiscent of the Protostar, which I think is kind of neat. Same with the warp nacelles too. They're like very round, but also kind of short, but not like super short for the design. So yeah, it has a little bit of like Kelvin timeline Protostar vibes, in my opinion. Now, this next ship is a little interesting because it technically doesn't have a name yet. This was introduced in Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and really the only name that it has is just the false flagship, or the NCC 1279. I think that was the registry. I'll have to look that up. Hold on. Yeah, NCC 1279. So the whole thing with this ship is that it was meant to be in like an in-world kit bash. This was a ship put together through stolen parts as to be used as a false flag operation to ignite a war between the Federation and the Klingons. In dialogue in the episode, it's identified as a crossfield class because it was using a crossfield class transponder. And when you look closely at it, you can clearly see that it's using a crossfield style saucer section, or at least a modified one. But the rest of the ship is very much not a crossfield class ship. Now, an interesting note about this ship is that there was a little bit of foreshadowing there as well. In the same episode, you also see the ship docked at Starbase 1 here, where it is flipped upside down, as if we wouldn't notice that, because you can definitely see the nacelles are upside down and the registry number on the side of the nacelles is upside down. There's a lazy attempt to introduce new variants of ships in Star Trek Strange New Worlds. But yeah, the fact that they did this in the same episode, incredibly lazy. To this day, it still drives me nuts. Here you can see like the full 3D model and kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about, how it's very much a modified crossfield style saucer section, but very different in the back. It almost has like these NX style struts in the back that extend to Strange New World style nacelles, and this little pod section with a deflector dish. Now, the dialogue from this episode really did imply that this was meant to be like a kit bash style ship. It was going to be like a one of a kind ship, and spoilers, it ends up getting destroyed. So you would think that would be the last time we'd see this thing. But then come along in season 3, we see this ship here in the opening credits, which is this ship here. It's still the false flag ship. In fact, this was posted by one of the 3D artists from the show. So internally, they were still calling this the false Federation ship. But yeah, remember how they just lazily flipped it over for that one shot at Starbase 1? Well, they corrected it, basically. Well, they corrected the model, so they kept it flipped upside down, but they reoriented the saucer and the nacelles so they were right side up. And actually, I like this version a lot because it kind of gives the vibe of like a Strange New World style NX class, because we got these like NX style struts, and then the nacelles go up and then kind of focus around this one pod section. The pod section is quite a bit lower because it kind of hangs down with the deflector down there. So it almost gives like a small vibe of Bill Krause's Duderstock class as well. But yeah, I don't know what it is about the ship. I like the look of it. I would love to see more of it both in the show and in Star Trek Online. Now, of course, I'm going to bring up a lower deck ship, the Osler. Now, I'm generally surprised this ship hasn't been added to Star Trek Online yet already, because the ship was introduced in season 1 of Lower Decks, and while it didn't do all that much, I still think this would be a cool ship to add into the game. It does have like a weird spooky vibe to it. I feel like this is something that would be really great to release like sometime around the Halloween event. Like it would definitely be some kind of science vessel. But yeah, I think this could be kind of interesting because since we know so little about the ship, it kind of gives the devs a bit of freedom to kind of screw around and be a little more creative with the console and trade on this thing, and just kind of make some stuff up to further feed into the spooky vibe of it, which again is why I think this would be a great ship to release around the Halloween event to further feed into the spooky aspect of it all. Another lower deck ship, the ship was only ever identified as Relga's Bird of Prey. And as you can see, it's quite different from the other birds of prey that it's flying alongside with. One, it's like twice the size, which gives it some sense of similarity to the old Cavort class, which was a class of bird of prey seen in early the Next Generation, which I really hate the Cavort class, mostly because it's literally just the same model as the Burrell class. It's just the wings were always tilted up on the Cavort class, and they scaled it to be significantly larger than the old Burrell class, mostly because otherwise it would look insanely tiny next to the massive Galaxy class. But yeah, I've never liked the Cavort, and I understand why Star Trek Online was always resistant to add it to Star Trek Online, because it's literally just the Burrell blown up in size. But I feel like Relga's ship here is a good compromise to that, because while it is very similar in size to the Cavort class, it is structurally different from the old Burrell class. For one, it's got this layered double wing set up here. It's got this weird glowing fin section up on the top of the ship, and the head and neck section are also different from the original Burrell. Actually, weirdly enough, they're actually very similar to the D5 class battlecruiser from Star Trek Enterprise, which I thought was kind of a neat detail. It kind of gives the vibe that maybe this is a ship that was also sort of a kit bash of a bird of prey, or maybe even like a modified Cavort class, one that was damaged and they had to put it together with other like various parts and whatever. But could explain why we don't have like an actual name for the ship too. But yeah, I think this is a cool ship. It's a good way to appease some of the Klingon players, especially those who have been begging for a Cavort class for so many years. Because again, I don't think they'll add the Cavort class, but I feel like this is a really good compromise, because again, it's a bird of prey that is very similar in size. It just looks a bit different, but it's still a bird of prey. So while a new Orion ship was recently added to Star Trek Online very recently, there are still plenty of other Orion ships that were introduced in Star Trek Lower Decks. This one, however, while it did appear in Lower Decks, actually has origins going all the way back to the old animated series. And I really love this Orion ship. I had to look this up on Memory Alpha. It's only identified as Orion Vessel, and I really like this thing because it looks absolutely ridiculous. And for that reasoning alone, I really want this thing in Star Trek Online. There are other Orion ships that were introduced in Lower Decks that I would also love to see added to the game. Like there was that one medical frigate ship that I thought was going to be some sort of massive old dreadnought. There's that giant Orion destroyer that they used to collide with that Dyson shield thing that Nick Locarno had. And there's also, you get like a brief image of this one Orion flagship that kind of looks like a Star Destroyer. That would be really awesome to have. But this thing definitely needs to be added to Star Trek Online because it's absolutely silly and I love it. So I did want to limit this list to 15 ships. Actually, I wanted to limit it to 10 ships, but I just can't help myself, so I upped it to 15. But even then, I still couldn't help myself, so I wanted to include an honorable mention section as well. First is the USS Adventure. Now, hear me out on this one, because I know this one is a weird pick, because this ship isn't real. This ship is not an actual ship that exists within the Star Trek universe. This was a ship that appeared in a holodeck episode. What was the name of the episode? A Space Adventure Hour. It was, in my opinion, one of the few highlights of season 3 of Strange New Worlds, because man, they really dropped the ball on that season. But this episode, I really enjoyed. Basically, the Enterprise was testing out a prototype holodeck and to see how it would work installed on starships. And so it's very much a callback to the classic holodeck shenanigan episodes of The Next Generation, which normally I would be like, oh, really, they're forcing in a holodeck episode in the prequel series. But I really enjoyed the episode because the whole episode is them just like lampooning the original Star Trek. And it's I don't know, it just ends up being really funny. But yeah, you do get a brief shot of the USS Adventure, which is part of the fictional version of Star Trek in this holodeck adventure. And yeah, I just wanted to shout out this ship because I think it would be really funny to add to Star Trek Online. Yeah, it's a little immersion breaking, but I feel like this is something that would be really funny to add for like the summer event or something like that, because the summer event and the winter event, those are times when they get a little silly with the ships. And I feel like USS Adventure is a perfect opportunity to get a little silly with things. That's the only reason I wanted to mention it, just because I think it would be really funny to add this to Star Trek Online. Though, to be frank, I don't think they'll ever add this, at least not as a playable ship, maybe as like a console or something like that. But yeah, as a playable ship, I feel like them doing this is probably a bit of a stretch even for them, but I think it would be really funny, so I wanted to mention it for the video. And now we're on to the portion of the video where I'm talking about ships that already exist in the game technically, but I want versions with better stats. So here we go. We got the Lamar class not that long ago in Star Trek Online, and the stats leave something to be desired. Another thing is that they put the Lamar class on the Sovereign class skeleton, meaning if we get another Lamar class, that means we also get another Sovereign class. So introducing the Mirror Universe version of the Lamar class means that we have an opportunity here to give the Sovereign class the World Razor treatment, meaning that this is a chance to finally give players the 5/3 Sovereign class that we've been so desperately begging for ages. Sadly, because this is not only a mirror universe ship, but a ship featured in Star Trek Prodigy, it would likely end up being a lockbox or promo ship, but so was the World Razor. Moving along in that same line of thinking, the mirror universe version of the California class, which we got to see in the Lower Decks series finale. It's the Cerritos that went all Sovereign class. It's got Sovereign style nacelles and a bunch of new weapons mounts. The ship is absolutely silly, and I would love to see a version of the California class with better stats on it. I'm not going to go into too much about this one because, frankly, if we do see another version of the California class, really, I think it should be a legendary ship, and I'm planning on doing another video just for legendary ships I want to see, so this is going to be a different topic. But since I'm already talking about other mirror universe ships, I felt like I needed to at least acknowledge this one. So that's it. If we're talking about new versions of the California class, I like my version a lot better. A mirror universe version of the Excelsior class. Now, the main reason I really want this is to use this as an homage for Star Trek Shattered Universe, because that way we have an excuse to introduce an Excelsior with a hangar bay, because that was the whole thing behind Star Trek Shattered Universe. This was meant to be like a spiritual successor to Star Trek Invasion. It was another Star Trek game where you flew around in a fighter, except this one took place in the TMP era where you were on the Excelsior, and the Excelsior gets transported into the mirror universe, and suddenly all the shuttlecraft are turned into new fighters. Throughout the game, you end up going through various like mirror universe recreations of classic Star Trek episodes. It's a really cool game. I played this game a bunch when I was a kid, back when I still had a working PlayStation 2. So yeah, there's a lot of nostalgia for me for this idea of having an Excelsior with a hangar bay. And there's also the fact that, you know, I like ships with hangar bays and Star Trek Online in general. So yeah, making an Excelsior as like either a flight deck carrier, I feel like that would be the big favorite there, just to really emphasize the use of the fighters there. But, you know, they could also introduce this as a multi-mission cruiser, which that would also give it at least one hangar bay, or they could just introduce it as a dreadnought. I feel like there's an argument to be made for any of those. But yeah, I feel like flight deck carrier would be the coolest option. It would also be a good excuse to introduce new TMP fighters into Star Trek Online as well, like the Phantom or the Spectre class fighters here, which were also original to Star Trek Shattered Universe. And then finally, let's talk about the only two Terran Empire ships that are not in the game that are actually canon to the shows. The original ISS Enterprise. I never understood why this is still not a ship that is playable in Star Trek Online, a mirror universe version of the original series Constitution class. I feel like this would be a no-brainer, especially with all the mirror universe content that they were doing a while back. I never understood why they never got around to doing one of these. It really surprises me because it's literally the first Terran Empire ship. And then continuing that logic, we still don't have a mirror universe skin for the NX class either, which again is one of the very few canon on-screen appearances of a Terran Empire ship. And in fact, this episode, In a Mirror Darkly, that is when they introduced this iconic mirror universe yellow livery on the mirror universe ships. So I feel like not having the skin on the NX class, even at this point, it's insane to me. So it's crazy to me that they still haven't done this yet. So yeah, that is my current wish list for new ships to be coming to Star Trek Online over the course of 2026 and beyond. It got a little bigger than I intended it to, but you know, it always does with me on these wish list videos. So but yeah, that just means more to hope for, I guess. But yeah, let me know what you guys think of this list down below in the comments, and be sure to let me know what ships you really want to see come to Star Trek Online that aren't already in the game. And while you're down there, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. If you'd like to further support the channel, hit the join button to become a channel member. Check out the merch store down below. Check out the affiliate links in the pinned comment. If you're ever shopping on the Epic Games Store, be sure to use my content creator code STU1701. Any of these really help me out, and I really do appreciate it. Either way, though, thank you so much for watching. My name's Stu, and I will see you guys next time.